believe it is finally race week here in New York, and I'm sure everyone is super excited for the marathon on Sunday and probably a little bit stressed about the logistics of getting to the start line. New York is very unique in the sense that it is quite a process to get to the start of the race because you have to make it all the way out to Staten Island so that you can run across the Verrazano Bridge, and people often call that process of getting out there the marathon before the marathon. So wanted to answer a couple of questions about the start process, everything from getting to the start on the bus or the ferry to hanging out in the start villages to finally starting the race. Okay, so starting off with transportation to the start. So on your confirmation form, it will show what transportation you selected. You had selected this transportation several months ago, so you may have forgotten about it, but it is right here on the confirmation form. So it will either say bus, and there's a bus leaving from Midtown Manhattan, as well as one from New Jersey, or it will say Staten Island Ferry, which leaves from downtown Manhattan. If for some reason this section is blank on your form, it is probably because you forgot to select it. So not to worry, there is a booth at the expo where you can go and select transportation from available time slots that they have there. And you can actually change your transportation at that same booth. So for instance, if I found out that my friend was taking the Staten Island Ferry at 6 a.m. and I wanted to switch to that, I could go talk to them at that booth and they would be able to potentially switch me to that if there are spots remaining. That being said, the Staten Island Ferry is public transportation, so they can't really deny you entry onto the ferry, so I wouldn't stress too much. They're not going to not let you get to the start line. That is something that I was so nervous about for my first marathon. I literally thought I wasn't going to be allowed to run the marathon if I missed my time slot, so not to fret. And I do have experience taking both the ferry and the bus, so would be happy to answer more specific questions people have related to the different transportation options. But the short of it is basically that they're both fine and they're both good in different circumstances. I'll be staying in Midtown and I am wave 1, so taking the bus makes a little bit more sense for me. But if you're starting a little bit later in the day, it's nice that the ferry runs throughout the whole morning versus the bus only has super early time slots because they have to close the Verrazano Bridge, and that's how you get to the start line. So something to consider if you're in one of the later waves. So here's me and my sister Izzy on the bus this past year. So this was my first time taking the bus, and basically the process for it is there's just like a ton of buses that leave from the New York Public Library on a rolling basis. So it's not like you sign up for the 5:30 bus and there's like a line for 5:30, a line for 6, whatnot. It's just kind of like if you're on the bus, you just get in line and you wait until you get onto a bus, and depending what time you arrive, like the line might be super long. So just one word of caution is to get there early and allow some time to make it through the line. But the good thing about the bus is once you're on, it takes you straight to the start line. If you take the ferry, which I have taken that, I took that in 2021, and basically you go down to the ferry via subway or however else you plan to get there. You hop on the ferry. The ferry lines weren't as long as the bus. You just kind of like walk on, or at least you did when I did it in 2021. But then once you get to Staten Island on the ferry, then you hop on another shuttle bus to the start line. So it's not like the ferry drops you right at the start line. But either option definitely allow a little bit of time, but basically make sure that you are going in a window that corresponds to the transportation options that New York Roadrunners gave you, because they give you options that should get you to the start line in time for your wave, and people in different waves have different time options because they start at different times. So as long as you're abiding by the different options that New York Roadrunners gave you when you selected your transportation, you should be fine. But when in doubt, talk to someone at that booth at the expo. Oh, and one other thing to cover is I got a couple questions on if you can Uber to the start line. Number one, that would be extremely expensive to do. But number two, logistically, it is not a good idea because, as mentioned, the bridge closes to get to Staten Island. So unless you do a very indirect route, it will be very hard to get the start line. So highly encourage you to use the transportation options provided. And again, I've plugged this website before, but this is Runar Gunderson's marathon website. I will put the link below, but like it has everything you could ever need to know. I was poking around the New York City Marathon app to see if they had any of these views, and they just like don't have anything like what he has on his website. So I would highly recommend checking it out because he gives so much detail. Okay, and once you make it to Fort Wadsworth, the start area, you will be here in the start village. So you'll go through security check. It's typically been pretty fast for me, but just depends on timing. And then they will have 3 different villages for the different colors that correspond to your color that you have on your bib. So there will be a pink village, there will be an orange village, and there will be a blue village. The villages are just basically like the most direct path to where your corrals enter. That's not to say you can't hang out in the orange village if you're blue, or blue village if you're pink, or whatever, but just an easy way for you to be close to where you should be entering at the start line. But basically you'll hang around in the start area. There will be plenty of porta potties, though the lines definitely get very long. So I would recommend like just getting in line, going to the bathroom, maybe doing that again, just because the longer you wait, the longer the lines will be. And they'll also have Dunkin'. I believe they have one Dunkin' like area in each of the villages, and it typically has like coffee, water, bagels, and you just kind of like chill, relax, hang out there until it is time to get into your corrals. Also, there will be no reception in the start village, so if you are hoping to meet up with a friend when you're there, highly suggest picking a meeting point in advance, or better yet, going with them to the start. Okay, so on his website, he also has like the different waves and what time the corrals open and close. So you can see here, you need to be in your corrals, depending on the wave, a minimum of 15 minutes before, or else they'll close. But for some of the waves, you need to be there even sooner. So just make sure to get into the corrals in plenty of time. In my opinion, there's no downside into just going ahead and going into the corrals, because they have porta potties within the corrals, and those porta potties tend to have shorter lines. So definitely get in there early, and then they'll collapse the corrals and you will walk up to the start line. So here you can see the map of the start line, but basically it's blue and orange on the top of the bridge, pink on the bottom. If you have questions about moving around in colors, I cover that in another video that I had posted, but basically you can always move back in terms of numbers, wave numbers, and corral letters.
So let me know if you have any more questions about the start, and I would be happy to answer, but definitely follow along for more New York Marathon logistics.